Every World Cup, the same questions comes into people's mind, especially the black communities, and the discussion always come online. Why does Argentina team does not have any black player? Now, people usually give one or two answers explaining this. One of the way is there are not many black people in Argentina, and the other argues that Argentina deliberately wiped out its black population. Neither of these answers, tell the exact story. The real history is more complicated, and historians still debates up to today.
You guys don't want black people to be on the Argentina team. And Argentina already has like just won the World Cup without them. With them? Do you know what we're gonna do with them? Yeah, you guys don't want that. You guys are never gonna see a World Cup in your life. Argentina's gonna win everything.
Now, today we'll be looking at why or what actually happened and why Argentinians or Argentina looks different from other World Cup teams like Uruguay, Brazil, talking about England, France, and what that does or does not mean for any black person.
Black people should not support Argentina during the World Cup. Jamaicans should not support Argentina during the World Cup. Now, these are statements that I hear circulating on the internet, and I am a Jamaican who has lived in Argentina for over 10 years. And initially, I decided to come on here and just defend Argentina, but I'm like, I'm not going to do that.
Argentina was not always seen as a white country. This will surprise many people. In the early 1800s, around a quarter of or to one third of the Buenos Aires was black or was for the African descent. Now, in some parts, even Argentina, in some parts of other Argentinian cities, that percentage was even higher. Africa had been brought through the transatlantic slave trade beginning in around 1500s, and the slavery was there until about 1853. Now, Afro-Argentinians were not a small footnote in the history of Argentina. They helped shape the country's culture. They helped change the culture, music, they influenced the dances, they influenced the condombe traditions, and even the early roots of tango. So the idea that Argentina was always, or the idea that Argentina was always an overwhelmingly European simply is not true. Though there are theories, explaining how they deliberately brought, white people to to make it more of European. So what happened? You may ask yourself.
In 1800, about a third of Buenos Aires was black. And by 1875, the Argentine government had stopped counting black citizens in the census because there supposedly weren't enough left. Now, maybe it's just me, but when I hear something like that, I have questions because people don't just disappear. So, of course, I started digging. What I found was one of the wildest stories I've come across in a long time. See, a lot of people today genuinely believe that Argentina didn't have a significant black population, ever. If you ask some Argentines about black Argentinians, they'll probably tell you that black people just came there recently, that they're immigrants, that they've always been a tiny minority. But that's not what the history says. Black people helped build Buenos Aires. Black people fought in Argentina's wars for independence. Black people helped shape Argentine culture. Even parts of the tango trace back to Afro-Argentine traditions. So how do you go from a city where black people made up roughly a third of the population to a country where people grow up believing that black Argentinians barely exist? That's where the story gets ugly.
Between the 1800s and the late, the black population became less visible. Why? There was no one single reason. There were several. Number one is the war. Black men, you remember the black men were used as muscles into military at a higher rate than white men or the Argentinian white men. Now, thousands fought in Argentina War of Independence, and many never came home. So you see, It looks like deliberate. Okay. Now, the same happened during the Paraguayan War. Another thing is diseases. There was a cholera outbreak around 1871, and the poor, hygiene in the neighborhoods and the yellow fever epidemic, which wiped a lot of the black population. Now, because many of these black people lived in that neighborhoods. And another thing is the changing of identities. As black men died in large numbers, many black women, married white or European migrant men. Their children were often recorded as white in the late census. Remember, there's a time when census was conducted in Argentina, and simply the black people were not included in the census. Now, these was simply clarified differently. And finally, we're talking about immigration. Now, after 1853, Argentina encouraged mass European immigration. Now that's where the Eurasia come in. About 4 million Europeans arrived between 1860 and 1914. That dramatic, changed the country's demographic. It's like they were diluting the black genetics. Even if the black now population stayed relatively stable in numbers, it became much smaller percentage compared to the total population. And in 1895 there, the government stopped recording African ancestry in the national census altogether. Guys, what does it tell you? Was Argentina deliberately erasing the black community?
Part of it was war. Black men were disproportionately pushed into military service and sent to fight in conflicts with devastating casualty rates. Part of it was disease. Yellow fever tore through Buenos Aires in 1871, and it hit black communities especially hard. But the more I read, the more I realize this wasn't just a story about tragedy. It was also a story about intention. Because there were powerful people in Argentina who openly believed that the country's future should be white. Not diverse, not multicultural, white. And unlike people today who hide behind coded language, these men wrote it down. One of the most famous was Domingo Faustino Sarmiento. He's celebrated in Argentina today. Schools named after him, streets named after him. A former president, a founding figure. And he argued openly that Argentina should be remade through European immigration. Then came something called the Blanqueamiento. Millions of European immigrants were encouraged to come to Argentina. The country changed rapidly. And while all that was happening, something else was happening too. The remaining Afro-Argentine population was slowly being erased. Not just from neighborhoods, from records, from census categories, from public memory. That's the part that got me. Because when most people hear the word erasure, they picture like burning books or something. But sometimes erasure looks a lot quieter than that. Sometimes it's changing categories. Sometimes it's deciding who gets counted, whose story gets told. And then a few generations pass. Right. And eventually people start saying there were never any black people here. What are you talking about?
This is where the historians, disagree. And we've seen some scholars describe what happened as a deliberate racial erasure or even genocide, which might be, true. And others, including the historian George Reid Andrews, that argue that evidence about that there was a combination of war, diseases, immigration, and racial purification rather than one what contained or planned extermination. Now, everyone's agree that Afro-Argentinians became largely erased from the national history, which is the saddest thing. So if you're supporting Argentina, think twice.
We can't continue to hold the current population or generation accountable or eternally accountable for the sins of their forefathers. It's not fair to them, and it would not be fair to you. We have to be careful how we feed into what we see online, because remember, there's a narrative and there's a certain set of people who are pushing a certain narrative. And if you just dig into it and swallow it up and regurgitate it without thinking or without analyzing it or without even having a personal experience for yourself, then you're in deep trouble. Because think about yourself, think about your own country. You don't want people just coming online and just spreading propaganda about your country like that when you know that it's not true. And a lot of times when we see something circulating all the time, we realize it's definitely it's a certain narrative that people are trying to push, and it's not necessarily the truth.
Okay, tell me, why are you supporting Argentina? Now, let's talk about what's happening in football. The history shows up in this football team too. Argentina's first black international player was Alejandro de los Santos. Alejandro, mark that. He helped Argentina win the South American Championship in 1925. Now, this person was selected for the first FIFA World Cup in 1930 because he helped Argentina. Since then, only a handful of black players have been representing Argentina in international levels. Meanwhile, you've seen neighboring countries like Uruguay has produced or has mass produced black football stars for centuries. Now, Brazil, you've seen the Brazil, many of the stars, the Rivaldo, Ronaldo, uh, who are, look more of black. That's one of the reasons people keep asking the same question every World Cup. Why do other teams look so different? Now, guys, every nation team or every national team reflects its country's history. Brazil, imported slave traders or Africans as slaves and than any other American countries. Now, today, about half of Brazil population, mark that, half of Brazil populations identify as black or mixed race. France, one of the most diverse immigration from former colonies and in Africa and the Caribbean, contain so many black people. The England squad, which by the way won today, imported people from the former British Empire. Argentina's team, on the other hand, reflects a country shaped by massive European migration during the late 1800s, combined with the decline and erasure of the Afro-Argentinian population. Different histories, different outcomes. Mhm. Is that sinking in? Now, none of these themes are more or less legitimate because of it. But if you think twice, you can add for yourself. Now, what does that mean for many fans? Here is an important part. History doesn't decide who gets to be a football fan or not. I've seen people who support teams of all kind for their own reasons. Maybe they admire a player, there's that discussion between Messi and Ronaldo. Maybe they watched World Cup as a child and they fall in love with these players. Maybe they married into that culture. Okay. Maybe they simply love the way the team plays. Okay. No one, has to justify supporting Argentina because of their race, because of, they erase the black. At the same time, it's worth, recognizing that from the Afro-Argentinians who were pushed out of the country's official history for generations. Today, Afro-Argentinians organization continue to preserve that history, that culture, and they're trying to keep this culture alive, even if they have told they've incorporated into their culture, looks like their origin culture. Now, guys, the history of Afro-Argentinians is real. The history is fascinating and still it's being uncovered today. It deserves better than intent made and oversimplified arguments during every World Cup. So if you choose to believe or if you choose to support Argentina or not, it's up to you. You know what? But from my perspective, I'll reserve mine in the comment. So let me know in the comment section. What do you think about supporting Argentina as a black person? Is Argentina or does Argentina deserve, the black support or not? Please let me down in the comment section. Till next time. Bye.
And what keeps sticking with me is that Afro-Argentines never fully disappeared. Their descendants are still there. Their history is still there. Their contributions are still there. The thing that disappeared was the acknowledgement, right? And honestly, I think that's one of the scariest forms of erasure. Because once a country forgets who helped build it, it becomes a whole lot easier to pretend that those people never mattered in the first place. A third of Buenos Aires was black. And that should be common knowledge. The fact that it isn't is part of the story.
Black people should not support Argentina during the World Cup. Jamaicans should not support Argentina during the World Cup. Now, these are statements that I hear circulating on the internet, and I am a Jamaican who has lived in Argentina for over 10 years. And initially, I decided to come on here and just defend Argentina, but I'm like, I'm not going to do that. Now, I have my phone here with some notes because I don't want to forget anything, because I've spoken about this topic so many times, but it always seems like there's something that I haven't, a topic that I haven't, or a specific aspect that I haven't touched on as yet, and, people keep on sending me videos, or I just have to be defending Argentina all the time online, and I just wanted to just analyze the situation and to also share my personal experience, perspective, and also talk about the experiences of my friends, my black friends from other countries as well, who live in Argentina. Now, what are some of the things that people have to say about Argentina on the internet? They're racist. Yeah, they're racist. Also, the fact that they eliminated their black people, there are no black persons in persons in Argentina. That in and of itself is a racist statement, because that's not true. People also say, oh, there are no black players on the football team, as if having a black player on your team automatically disqualifies you from racism. Do you know that there are other persons, or let's say white, or I don't like to say white people who are married to black or indigenous people or minorities who are racist as well? Like, I don't understand how does that make you racist or not if you have a black player or not on your team. Anyways, another thing that people talk about is the recent incident where footballers are stating, an Argentinian footballer said something racist against I think a Brazilian footballer, a black Brazilian footballer. Also, there was an incident of a Brazilian lawyer in Brazil who almost went to prison because she made the sign of a monkey towards a black waiter in Brazil. There are also other incidents of Argentines in Brazil sending racist texts about children. The newest one is the nigger burger in Buenos Aires, and all these things. Oh, and also the president voted against slavery being the gravest act against humanity. Now, when you look at all these things, they are really a lot. And I understand why people are mad at Argentina. I understand why people have a negative view of Argentina. But at the same time, I feel like we always say it's that deep. Well, it's that deep. And we have to kind of like analyze things, put context to them, really look into them and to see, does this really make sense? Is it fair? Is my conclusion fair? Now, let's talk about what happened in the past. When I make comments about, love being in Argentina, saying that Argentines are nice, people say, go research Argentina, go and look at their history. And I'm like, I did. I know it. Like, I know what happened. I had to study Argentinian history to be able to study in Argentina. No, I must say that part was never included in the history books that we read. And at no point did I realize that they were blacks. Maybe it was mentioned and I wasn't really, maybe I wasn't really aware of it, but I don't remember it being mentioned. Eventually, I started to see things and I started to do my own research. And I realized that, yeah, blacks really did play a very important part in Argentinian culture and history and all of that. And because of certain circumstances and discrimination, they eventually, the population decreased. It wasn't wiped out because there's still blacks in black Argentines. No, any form of activity or action that is done to hurt another person, whether they're black, white, pink, is horrible. And I'm never in agreement with that. So considering that part, I do agree that that was a horrible act. And I really do not like that aspect of the history. But then I also look at it and I'm like, all those persons who committed those acts, they're not alive. And maybe it wasn't even the majority of the population who participated in that. So how is it that I'm going to hold a country to this day, hold it against them? Imagine your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a murderer, right? And then people see you now and say, look at so-and-so, don't talk to him, or lock him up, or, you know, because he's a murderer, or his great-great-grandfather was a murderer, you know? We can't continue to hold the current population or generation accountable or eternally accountable for the sins of their forefathers. It's not fair to them, and it would not be fair to you. We have to be careful how we feed into what we see online, because remember, there's a narrative and there's a certain set of people who are pushing a certain narrative. And if you just dig into it and swallow it up and regurgitate it without thinking or without analyzing it or without even having a personal experience for yourself, then you're in deep trouble. Because think about yourself, think about your own country. You know, you don't want people just coming online and just spreading propaganda about your country like that when you know that it's not true. And a lot of times when we see something circulating all the time, we realize it's a certain narrative that people are trying to push, and it's not necessarily the truth. And also, I was going to say something and I forgot it, but then I think it'll come back eventually. Now, let's talk about all the other persons, the president voting against the recent resolution. It's one person. Argentina has a population of 40+ million people. Yet if we have 100, and we don't even have 100, we have probably about 10 or 15 cases of, Argentines having interaction with racism or black people or indigenous people. And we go about and we say the entire 40 million people are racist because 100 persons did something that was horrible. That's not fair, because on a daily basis, we have members in our family who do horrible things and they don't represent us. You have so many persons in our country doing horrible things and they don't represent us. I don't think the president of any country or prime minister ever goes to the population and asks their opinion about a topic before they go and vote on it. So if one person voted against it, why is it that you're holding the entire country accountable? If 5 persons did racist things or racist actions, why are we holding the entire country accountable? How many times have you heard of a story coming out of Argentina where a black person was murdered, black people being persecuted by the police officers, black people being discriminated against, not being allowed to go into certain places because of the color of their skin, black people being denied jobs, black patients denying care from black caregivers? I'm going to tell you, like, black people who live in Argentina will not share any of the sentiments that you guys are sharing about Argentina online. And I'm sure that most of you who are sharing these things have never been to Argentina. You've never interacted with an Argentine. You just hear something and it just suits your ears. You're just looking for the next thing to talk about, or just want to feed into the narrative or feed into whatever everybody else is saying, and you want to fit in, so you just share and share and share. When I see people, like, if you want to talk about what the bad things that are happening, go ahead, because you should talk about them. But what really grabs me is when they say, you're supporting Argentina for the World Cup, but you'll never be accepted in Argentina. Huh? Who told you that? Who told you that?